we're back. So obviously you see the character on the screen. This time I have Goldlewis and I'm joined by Lolo. Say what's up.
What's good?
Lolo obviously makes his own video, so I'll put his channel on the screen as well, especially later in the video. But yeah, I mean, I feel like there's just so much to talk about with this character. I feel like he, in a lot of people's eyes, he definitely ruined the game last season. But I mean, I think the biggest part was obviously White Walled Assault. Why don't you walk me through how strong you think he was last patch and now currently with White Walled Assault?
Okay, so White Walled Assault last patch was obviously extremely broken.
Yeah.
And that is, along other nice buffs that he got, something that pushed him like way up the tier list compared to what he was previously. He was probably hovering around top 4 territory, in my opinion, last patch. But if you ask me, I think that Nago was a little stronger than him overall, and then Sol and Mei, their well-roundedness combined with, like, they also had amazing strengths, probably the versatility factor make them a little more stable than he was, even though he just had this thing that was like insanely stupid broken. And then of course there were also like resource factors as well, so getting more burst last season as well. And you know, he just had a lot of things going for him. Like when you stack the buffs on top of White Wild Assault, he just got a gigantic buff, like almost as big as, maybe even bigger of a buff from season, like late season 1 to season 2 Goldlewis, which was also an insanely huge buff, of course, as you know. Like no Karas and like no drone to all your buttons are buffed, and God drone and Karas. So anyway, he was really, really good last version. There's no doubt about that.
Gotcha. Okay. And I guess this is kind of a obvious question to most, but where would you rank Goldlewis in terms of White Walled Assault users? So obviously there's Bedman, walk me through last patch where you thought he was in terms of using it, and now this patch. So there's Bedman, there's Goldlewis, there's Nago, and there's Pot. And I believe that's the only 4.
Okay. So I think, if you want to look at how much the character gains from White Wild Assault, he is the best in both versions, for sure, in my opinion. Both because, like, the range on his is huge. It's, like, a lot bigger than all the other White Wild Assaults. I mean, Pot's is decent size, but Goldlewis just goes super far, has a dumb anti-air hitbox, etc. And on top of that, the thing about Goldlewis, like compared to Nago, I would say, because those are the two that are in contention, like Pot and Bedman, they got a lot out of it, but they weren't able to like just push their offense forever, basically, using White Wild Assault. Because what would happen last version, right? Let me like show kind of an example sequence. So you would like do this kind of thing, right? And like end your pressure, and then you could like FRC drone. And you keep the pressure up for a long time here. And then once you're running out of meter after that turn, like assuming they block everything, you just White Wild Assault back in. And pretty much no matter what, even if you started at exactly 50 meter, you're building to another 50 meter. And like every iteration of White Wild Assault you want to do is just going to give you like another turn there. And characters only have so much meter and HP. Assuming they block everything, by the way, like best case scenario, they block everything and they die. Whereas, well, like what could Bedman do? Like, okay, he could White Wild Assault in, and maybe if it's FD'd, he'll be like kind of awkward spacing, and he can threaten like a 2K or something. But he's really not, you know, threatening the same sorts of things that Goldlewis could, and also he's not murdering you to the same extent. I mean, Pot got good usage out of it, of course, but they couldn't just like use it to keep their turn going forever, basically, which was just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, insanely broken. But Nago, on the other hand, I think the main thing that made it really good is honestly more the threat of it than the thing itself, because it just made it really risky to interact with his high blood pressure.
Yes, yeah.
And the plus frames, while they were annoying, actually his was on the smaller end and also like slower compared to this. So he wouldn't really get his bite strike throw that often out of it, actually, especially outside the corner. And he also wouldn't really use it as a neutral skip. Whereas Goldlewis, on top of having it being super broken on offense, of course, for the reasons I just mentioned, it was like so brain dead broken on in neutral, and it still is. I'm not gonna lie, it's really good for some situations. But the fact that you have an option that you can use like 3+ times a round while building your burst back, that gives you minimum +7 guard crush once you're in, that anti-air is for you, and beats every move in the game is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So for those reasons, he was the best user of it, in my opinion. Like, you go from a character who's pretty much only like one of two major drawbacks with him is he's a little bit awkward in neutral. It's overplayed like how bad he is exactly in neutral, but he's kind of slow, he's kind of stubby. And how do most characters deal with that? Like they space outside of his JD and like BT range, and they try to whip punish him, and they you know, use their buttons that make it a little bit awkward for him to approach. But all of that completely flies out the window when you have like an unavoidable plus invincible guard crash. Like it's unavoidable. That's what made it so broken with him, because it was just so huge. Like with dash momentum, I'm literally over here and I can do like dash wild assault from the other side of the screen, which also means you can punish some characters' zoning tools. Like if you're sitting over here and a Testament's throwing fireballs at you, just reaction white wild assault, you can still do that. If Axel does Rensen, you can just like, you know, do a reaction wild assault if he's not spaced 100% correctly for it. If Kai does fireballs, you do wild assault. If Bridget does, you know, it was like a lifesaver in some matchups, basically. Like Bridget throwing yo-yo, that situation was doomed before the patch, before White Wild Assault. After White Wild Assault, it's like, it goes from doomed to being almost your favor on their own offense, which is obnoxious. And then there was the whole thing, like, again, even if you get hit, you build it back and you take less damage. So it all adds up to make him the best Wild Assault user, IMO, White Wild Assault.
Got you. Okay. And so you mentioned before, like, his neutral is, you know, he's slow, you know, so what about without White Wild Assault? If you had to give me a number from 1 to 10 on how good his offense and his neutral are without White Wild Assault, what would that look like?
Okay, so his offense is probably between a 9 and a 10 out of 10.
Okay.
The only thing that doesn't make it have like an absolute perfect score is that it on his offense, right, without meter, he's not making you guess in the same way that like Jealous Rage Abbott is, where it's like a straight up 50-50. He's making you guess as to like where the interaction or where the least risky interact point is, basically. And there are things that people do that I think really exacerbates his, you know, offense feeling super oppressive against him. Like they'll hard commit to blocking, or they won't know where to mash, or they won't have drilled reactions with him. Let me just give you an example. So like this is a super common pressure option right here. Like 2K268, very, very common extender, but at pretty much every spacing. And if you FD, it's going to be every single time. This has a 7-frame gap. And people just don't experiment with their characters at all as to like how they can interact with that. And there are a million different examples of Goldlewis like using that kind of thing to get massive extensions, and people feeling like they don't know where they can interact, but really it is that they just haven't labbed the situation. But again, even if you lab it, it's still really good, right? Because like this, for example, also has oftentimes at least a 7-frame gap. But depending on your character and depending on the spacing of the situation, if you're not careful, you can get counter hit really easily if you get outspaced by the 268. Or, you know, if you're like too close, like this kind of spacing, there isn't a mashable gap. And also it depends on the button that you press with your character. Like Nago 5K is not the same as like Zato 2P at this kind of spacing with 2K. Like Nago 5K is going to hit you every time. Zato 2P is just going to get him cooked every time. So, like that said, he's still Goldlewis. I'm not going to downplay how broken his offense is. Like I'm still doing insane amounts of chip damage. I'm still cranking insane amounts of risk. I'm still killing you in basically like one good hit, you're dead. With him, especially if he has meter. And he still has really good mix. Like, you know, some things have been developed with him over time. Now he has 50-50s like this that give him a lot of stuff, even on block. And so most characters I recognize don't just like knock you down and then put you in like an immediate strike throw guessing situation that makes you take a ton of damage either way. Basically, like most characters can't do that. I fully recognize that. It's just that he's not a perfect 10 because there are interact points that people, you know, don't do.
yeah, there's a lot to him. And what about his neutral outside of White Wild Assault?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. I will say, first of all, before I get into this, and this is not to downplay, I really try to have like a level-headed approach with Goldlewis. You really shouldn't take the opinion of a lot of top players when it comes to rating his neutral, because they just don't understand the character like in the slightest, or very limited understanding of him, and they just kind of look at him holistically and be like, well, this character's offense is so broken, his neutral is broken, he has JD, he has 5K, etc. It's all true, right? Like he has some very good things. Let me just answer your question off the bat. If I had to give it a number, it would probably be like a 4 or 5 out of 10.
Okay.
Just if we assume that 5 is like the exact midpoint of the cast neutral. I think he's like a little bit below average, but he's obviously not like the bottom, which is like no Eddie Zato or like no Bullet Happy Chaos or anything like that.
No bullet happy chaos.
I'm not trying to defend that either. You're right, but,
yeah, sorry.
but,
Keep
you know,
going.
it's like better than Pot. You know, it's like better than Eno, and obviously like better than ABBA. But among like the major characters, the main thing to consider about his neutral is not like how he has insane buttons or movement or things that are hard to contest outside of like JD, for example. It's more that it's really, really high reward. So you have to be really careful in neutral against him. And that kind of buffs his neutral. Like the threat of him just hitting you kind of makes his neutral better because you're a little bit more reluctant to press buttons and to like commit to certain game plans and that sort of thing. So that said, his speed is still a major issue. Like he's way less mobile than most of the cast. His forward dash is less slow than probably around half the casts just mashing backdash.
Yeah.
Like maybe not half, but you know, a decent minority of them. So that is something to consider. And while this jump arc is really good for offense, the fact that he can't double jump in neutral is a big issue. The fact that his air dash is pretty slow is a big issue. And also the fact that it's a lot harder to approach him than it is for him to approach you. If you're the offender, like it'll be a lot. Let me rephrase that. It'll be a lot harder to play neutral against him if you're trying to approach him versus if he's trying to approach you. The reason for that is because his speed, right? That's one issue. Because he has, you know, not that many pokes. If he's approaching you offensively, kind of this is sort of his best poke nowadays. Because they have progressively buffed this 2S over time. Now the total duration is pretty good on it, and you know, it can give you a combo here and there. But even that is not that amazing of a button. Like I'm here with dash momentum, and it's, you know, barely reaching. And so, other than that, he has like this far slash is very high total duration. All his behemoths are like 50 total duration. The ones that he's using in neutral, so completely free whiff punishes. You have to be careful with him, and he can't just brainlessly skip neutral. I mean, I know we mentioned White Wild Assault, but this is without White Wild Assault. He doesn't have like a brainless neutral skip except drone, essentially. But when you're trying to approach him, it becomes a lot harder because there is urgency to get in because of drone, right? Like you don't want to let him get this out because that is a very good situation for him. Don't get me wrong. Like once he gets drone, his neutral goes from like, well, neutral is over basically. It goes from like a 4 out of 10 to like a 9 out of 10 or like a 10 out of 10. Where like it's like your pot fighting like Chip or Geo back in the day where like you can't press anything because no matter what you press, you're just gonna get punished basically. And all you have to do is like hyper respect it. Or, you know, if you really want to try to RPS a jump or a button, you're screwed. And even if you respect it, he's plus. So if you play neutral more defensively with him, it's a lot stronger. And so he has like this 2K that has been buffed over time. It's faster, it goes further, it has less recovery. It's just a really strong button. It's a low, obviously, so you can't just run into him. And you can like buffer 684 behind it like this. See how it wasn't coming out on whiff in the input history? It only came out on hit. That's very, very strong and hard to deal with. And then this 5K. Disgusting low crush, high active frames. I mean, everyone knows 5K, and I've left out the elephant in the room, which is this button, which is just insanely broken. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. JD is hyper broken, but like especially if you're trying to approach it, like try to run up and hit me while I'm doing this. It's really, really hard. You basically can't. The hitbox is super bullshit on it. I'm not gonna lie. It makes it really, really risky to try to get in and stop him from getting the drone out at a certain point. But again, drone has like, you know, 34 frames of counter hit vulnerability on startup, which is, you know, fairly reactable. Not easy, but fairly reactable if you know it's kind of the thing that he's fishing for in neutral. And if they're playing a really defensive game plan, that is kind of all you do. Like there's not really any hyper urgency to approach him. You just kind of wait for him to pull out drone, and you don't run into these really, really safe and strong buttons that he has. Easier said than done. So his neutral is not that bad overall. But depending on the matchup, that strategy doesn't work. Like playing super defensive against Chaos doesn't really work. Like trying to keep out Nago obviously is not a thing. He's just gonna he doesn't give a shit about that. He's just gonna clone and you know, and be in there, or he's gonna be playing with buttons that reach like half screen. And or like Jacko. That kind of actually ties into what determines like what is and isn't a good matchup for Goldlewis, is how well characters can play around his defensive game plan. But anyway, sorry I'm going on.
No, good, don't worry.
That kind of answers the assessment of where he is in neutral, I would say right now. It's like situationally very good, but if characters can play around the good situations well, it's really exploitable, is kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, of course. I hear you. And I guess I'll throw this in because you kind of talked about how his run is slower. It feels slower than some characters' backdash. And I think for someone that plays a character like Zato, a character that doesn't have to go to Goldlewis necessarily, or at least in the past, that didn't really have to go to Goldlewis much to win the game. Obviously, like round start, you know, they say 3, 2, 1, go, and I do this, right? And there's not really much Goldlewis can do about that. But with White Walled Assault, obviously, before especially, you couldn't backdash it. You would get clipped.
Yeah, it still works that way, too.
It still works that way. So, I mean, I could definitely... White Walled Assault, again, like, he used it very well. But for him, it's like, Nago doesn't really have the round start issue because Nago doesn't really care if he wins or not. I mean, he's Nago. He'll get in. Again, he'll get in if he wants to get in, right? Bedman was kind of dependable on the matchup because obviously his strong fireballs, depending on the matchup, right? And then Pot, well, I don't care about Pot. But going back to, I guess we kind of loop in what you were talking about earlier, though, matchups. So talk to me about what matchups have this, from what you've played or from what you've seen, from last patch to this patch. Have any matchups you've played gone from like, okay, this is good, to, ooh, I don't really like how this feels right now, or this definitely feels a lot worse than it used to be?
Okay, so this is an interesting point. I'll start, I guess, with where I thought he was matchup-wise last patch. I thought that he only lost a handful of matchups. I would say the ones that are pretty much no debate were like Leo and Jacko.
Of course.
And then the ones that were kind of debatable were like May and Happy Chaos. And aside from those, he at least went even, but probably beat every other character in the
Even
game.
Soul? I heard Soul was pretty bad. And Sin. Soul and Sin.
I believe. Oh, I'm sorry. How could I miss Sin? Okay, good point. Good point. Let me rephrase. Last patch, he definitely lost to Sin. That was easily his worst. He almost definitely lost to Leo, and he probably lost to May and Chaos, and maybe Soul as well.
Okay.
But that's like absolute doom, is assuming that he lost to all of those. The only one that is absolutely certain is Sin, that he lost to last version. And in this version, it's kind of important to think about, like, okay, when I'm assessing matchups for Goldlewis, part of it is feel, but we haven't had that much time on the version. The other part of it is, like, how has the core of the game changed in such a way as to affect Goldlewis? And there's good and bad. So obviously the bad, I'll start with that, is White Wild Assault nerfs.
Yeah.
That is huge for him because it was insanely broken. A lot of his matchups were crutching on that last version, just because it was such a dramatic... I mean, think about it, right? You have an option that, for the reasons we already went over, is just insanely strong and just broken, honestly broken. And it goes from broken to being solid. Naturally, you would expect that to impact a character pretty hard. If they have something that is like round defining, something they do multiple rounds every single game and get advantage out of it every single time to what it is now, which is still good. Again, don't get me wrong. You would expect that to impact things. And so the way I think of it now is like, okay, that was one bad change. Now, there were also things in the system that were beneficial for him. So, for example, DPRC being gone is amazing for him.
Yeah.
That helps so much because I'll give you an example, right? He has this throw 50-50, right? You can left-right off of his throw. And DPRC basically killed this completely. And it was, very, very annoying. And a major part of playing around DPs in the past, of course, is threatening throw. And he's a guard crush strike throw character. And, just DPing out of guard crush and at spacings where you can't really threaten throw RC and getting advantage off of it, just so annoying for him to deal with. And he has ways around it that are pretty good. Like he has drone, he has his safe jab, but overall it was just super, super annoying for him. It made it so that DP characters just had a way better time against him in general compared to non-DP characters. Like you compare Zato on defense to like even Bridget or Chip, who have like 1 HP, but they have DPs. The difference is like astronomical for what they can do against Goldlewis to interact with him. And so him being able to play around DP without having to worry about RC helps so much. Even though you can't throw out a guard crush, even DPs, it doesn't matter because it's like the risk reward is so skewed against you now with DP. It's like ridiculous, and really discouraging people from pressing DPs during his offense helps him so much in those matchups. So much. And then the other thing is obviously White Wall Assault hard knockdown being gone, right? a major part of how characters could fight him last version is like you would need to kill him in one turn, basically.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, he's gonna go back to neutral, and he's got the Thanos Infinity Gauntlet on. And
Sato moment, man.
Yeah, he's just gonna snap, and he's gonna white wall assault, and you lose. So it's like, okay, we need to kill him right away. And part of that is you hit him, you white wall assault, and you snowball from there. That's part of why I think Chaos was probably losing, because he was like the most effective snowballer against Goldlewis. Because historically, that matchup has some very exploitable things that Chaos can do on offense. So kind of once you're in, if you can stay in, right, it's not that hard to just snowball him until he dies. Yeah. And being able to get the hard knockdown wall break and go from there was critical. It's like absolutely critical. And it's the same with a bunch of other characters, like Eno, for example, is another one where the neutral is actually losing for Eno because of matchup interactions.
Yeah.
But her being able to snowball with Red Wild Assault, hard knockdown, made it like so playable that all you really needed was, again, sometimes if you're going to beat him, you could get away with one hit. Mm-hmm. But now that you have to go back to neutral more often against him, again, even though his neutral isn't amazing, it's very situationally good. And most of the time in that situation post-wall break, he has full security gauge by that point. Mm-hmm. And so then the threat goes way up. And there are so many games now where I would have lost because I'm in a snowbally situation and I get wall broken and I just go back to neutral and I just get a drone out. You know, it's kind of annoying for most characters to contest at this kind of distance post-wall break, because obviously you have to worry about JD, you have to worry about like BT, white wall assault. And, 34 frames is reactable in a vacuum, but when you have all these other options at that spacing, most of the time it's hard to stop him from getting a drone out. And so that helps him a ton. So in a roundabout way to answer like how things got affected from a matchup point of view, it's difficult to say because you have to balance, losing white wild assault against gaining no DPRC and playing neutral more. Mm-hmm. And obviously some characters got buffs as well. Like, some of the characters you've done videos on. So like Johnny got way worse, for example. That's
I've only heard bad things about Johnny Goldlewis this match.
Yeah, so that's one that, for example, went from, I would say, like 55, 45 territory last version to now it's like 6'4 Johnny easily 6'4 Johnny.
Yeah.
A lot of Goldlewises would say, at least. I personally think that there's a world where it could be even, but most people think it's really bad. And the reason why is because that was one of the matchups, on top of his buffs, of course, where White Wild Assault really, really, really clutched up, because he would put you in this situation where you're in the corner and he's just looping deal misfiner. And it's so hard for Goldlewis to deal with that situation without White Wild Assault. But if you have White Wild Assault, that's an answer for everything, because even if you don't hit him, you're in there and you're plus. And what goes from a good situation for him, like supposed to be his game-winning situation, goes to a game-winning situation for you. And now that you don't have that, it hurts so much.
Yeah.
And there were other matchups where it really mattered to have the plus frames as well. And also there are matchups where you would prefer not to be playing more neutral. You would prefer to have like the old Wild Assault compared to not having Wild Assault hard knockdown against you. Like, for example, if you're playing against Mei, she was annoying if she broke you. With Red Wild Assault, it's true, but the neutral is like insanely dominant for Mei anyway.
Yeah.
Like her losing hard knockdown on Wild Assault doesn't matter that much compared to you losing plus Wild Assault against her. So that's one that definitely got a lot worse. And there are other matchups like that, like Jacko, and also Goldlewis having Wild Assault hard knockdown on wall break. While it is super broken in neutral, like there's an argument to be made, just don't spend it and then just play with the threat of the burst that you saved in neutral with Wild Assault anyway. But, it was still useful because his post-wall break Oki is underrated. It's still pretty good. But there are other matchups where, like, okay, it's kind of annoying not to have that now. Like Jacko, like characters that can zone him really effectively. That got worse. So I would say overall, right, to answer the question, all his DP matchups probably improved, because between losing, Wild Assault hard knockdown and the neutral in those matchups not being like too unplayably bad, and the fact that he got all these other buffs before that help a lot with that, I'd say that the trade-off is too great for them for the matchups not to have improved. But the other matchups where he really struggles in neutral against the characters and where he was crutching on White Wild Assault, those generally got worse. So it's a little hard to say exactly where he is. I think he's overall a little bit weaker than last version because he loses neutral more matchups than he wins, and he's playing neutral much more often now. is essentially like the overall way that I look at it compared to how he was pre-patch to how he was post-patch, because he didn't get any specific balance changes, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of just the main way to evaluate it in my eyes.
Okay.
He's still good though.
Yeah, of course. And one thing you keep bringing up is drone. So I guess drone. Okay, well, two things I wanted to ask about. Also, his 2P. So I think Goldlewis 2P has been talked about since forever.
Yeah, literally since forever. Even the first version, because it was 6 frames.
I think when you ask some Goldlewis players, I'll go, it's trash. But then some will be like, it's the GOAT. And then people that fight Goldlewis are like, I hate that button. It's broken, right? So tell me your opinions and how good 2P is, and then tell me how good drone is, because I think overall drone is, like, while it seems really good, there's, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot of characters that can just kind of ignore it a lot of times.
You're playing one of them.
Yeah, so Zato unironically used to be probably the best character versus drone before. I don't know where he is with it now, but before it was like, you send out drone, it's like, who cares? Like, drone on the screen? Alright, like,
yeah,
cool.
Pose
right?
up.
But I know there's some characters that are good at dealing with it. I'm going to assume Johnny Mistfinder is pretty good at dealing with it. Sin Beat Driver, I know Bridget's pretty good. I know Chip can get around it pretty well.
You have no idea about Sin, man. That's so cringe. Oh.
Yeah.
I'll get into it.
I'm trying to think, like, yeah, but point is, there's some characters that can just maybe not ignore the move. Like, again, Zato used to ignore the move, so I won't say ignore.
Yeah,
but
I mean, Chaos can still ignore it, you know. But yes, you're right. Most characters can't do that. They can't just completely skip
ignore it. So talk to me about how good overall drone is and how good overall Goldlewis's 2P is.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start with 2P. And I'll be much more brief on this than I have been thus far. It's broken. It's overall broken, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have drawbacks. So
gotcha.
It's broken because, of course, you have like your Abare is it's 5 frames. It's disjointed. It's decent horizontal hitbox like this, decent size, and it's plus on block, of course, which is really, really good. And when they buff, insane anti-air, right, and disjointed, and the fact that your 2K is 7 frames now, and your 2P is +3, means that characters have to respect 2P into 2K now.
Yeah.
Whereas previously, they could RPS 5 frames, especially if they were 5 frames that happened to high crush 2K at some spacings, which was a thing, which was very, very annoying. That's huge that he doesn't have to worry about that anymore. So the reward for 2P on block is really high, right? It's also very low total duration, so you can safe jab with this and always be plus. That is a privilege that essentially no characters have. Even Leo is not guaranteed to be plus with his safe jab, but Goldlewis is guaranteed to be plus. And it's just amazing all-around utility. But there is kind of one problem with this. You can't actually Gatling this in the same way that you can like 2P. Like mash your 2P against me on block. You see how you can do like PP like that?
Yeah.
If I mash 2P with Goldlewis, see how it isn't doing it with that same frequency?
Yeah.
So yeah, Goldlewis doesn't have the ability to kind of Gatling his 2P button, and what that means is on defense, he can't confirm his mash into a button. So what he has to do, if he's not in range for 2P, which is basically no spacings while you're on defense, because you can see even from here, even though the button has good horizontal reach, it does have quite a bit of knockback because it's higher attack level and whatnot than most other mashes. It's not going to combo 2P, and 2P2K generally doesn't combo either, only on counter hit. So the problem is, right, that he needs to buffer his mash out of defense. So you pretty much always buffer this. And on the surface, that might not seem like a problem to like non-Goldlewis players, right? But the issue with that is that doing a half circle input takes a lot longer than buffering a quarter circle input. So like if you're curious about what I mean and you're a non-Goldlewis player, what I would encourage you to do is try to go into neutral and do 2P684 without getting it on whiff and only getting it on block. This is something that takes a lot of practice and it's very, very difficult to do. And so kind of the effect of that is a lot of the time you're hard committing to 2P684 on defense before the 2P even hits. You cannot confirm the 2P hitting. You have to send it. And there are some situations where that is really, really, really exploitable and annoying for him to deal with. And almost every other character in the game can confirm their defensive mashes with at least a 2-hit confirm. A lot of them can do 3 as well on defense. Like you compare it to Johnny, they can link 3 2Ps on defense in a misfiner and get hard knocked down, it really makes a difference.
Yeah.
So, like against Slayer, for example, right? A lot of characters have that OS that I'm sure you've seen around. And I'm going to put that in air quotes because any Slayer with decent mental stack is not going to get OS'd most of the time.
Yeah.
But, and his offense is broken, yada yada. But point being, just on paper, right? If you try to do that OS, normally the way most characters do it is when they do the mash part of it, which is hitting the, the K and S follow-ups of Dandy, they just buffer their special behind their mash, and it doesn't come out on whiff. But with Goldlewis, you have to send the 2P684, and if he does Dandy H, Master's Hammer, he actually goes over it and does a full combo counter hit against you.
Yeah.
And there are other situations in other matchups where the same kind of thing applies, where like the 2P will whiff and then you just hit him out of the startup of his 684 and he gets counter hit, and it's like really, really annoying for him to deal with. But the overall trade-offs are so worth it for 2P that it's still a god tier button.
Yeah.
Like it's still a broken anti-air. Absolutely broken. Actually the best in the game. And just insane overall. Okay, so on to drone. It's also overall broken, but again, similar to 2P, it has drawbacks.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing I would say about drone is kind of what you alluded to earlier. Some characters interact with it, or don't interact with it rather, really well. And so I think that it's a major problem of people seriously not having labbed the correct ways that they have around drone.
Yeah.
And sort of the idea against drone in general, or if you're Goldlewis with drone out and you're approaching, you kind of want to safely approach on the ground so you don't get hit by disjoints or low pokes, and then cover the air approach with JS, because this thing is huge, it's disjointed, and if you super jump, it'll hit double jumps really reliably and that kind of thing, and air stalls get smoked by it. It's just really hard to get around on the surface of it, right? But the thing that you have to consider with him is that he can't really do this on reaction, because let me just go to his dust loop for a second here and grab the frame data. So the startup on this is 11 and his jump squat is 5, so he's like trying to react with a 16 frame move basically, which is not really something that people do in general, even though if a jump might have more startup and that kind of thing, aerials, etc. It's something that he's more doing preemptively at a safe spacing like this, and if you just kind of play the game of playing safely against drone while mixing in threatening your grounded disjoints and doing quick air-to-airs, like trying to call out his JS timing, because he's only going to do it at a certain spacing, then it becomes a lot harder for him to just get in for free with it. But most people are like super docile against it. They'll either like guess with a jump and just get hit by JS for free, or they won't represent anything on the ground at all, or they won't ever commit to wanting to block it, or they'll give up way too much space and they just don't vary their options enough. And then there's the other issue of character-specific things that you mentioned. So pretty much every character has something about it that is annoying for him to deal with. So I'll just like give some examples, I guess. Obviously, Happy Chaos I mentioned can skip it completely.
Yeah, gun, jump over it, right?
Yeah, he's the best overall against it for sure. But other characters have other things that, again, on their own might not seem super amazing, but when you actually mix in varying all your options against drone, it's a major part of getting around it. So like Noggle obviously can do a disjoint into Fukio back or jump over it and that kind of thing. Soul has Vortex and Revolver. And Soul is a really good example of like, he plays the game of, if you're mixing in your options correctly, you're not going to be getting away with free JSs on reaction. Because what will happen is like, you want to be safe against Vortex, not catching your jump startup and that kind of thing, or even getting anti-aired by it. And so you really want to be careful when it comes to preemptively JSing. But if you're not preemptively JSing, because it's 16 frames, you're not going to JS on reaction to like a grounded Bandit Bringer, for example, which can go over it and that sort of thing, right? Or so also can just like throw out a JH and be super safe. And if that happens to hit you, he'll be safe. And pretty much every character has something they can threaten that makes it way more annoying to get in for free. And then the other thing I want to mention here, right? I want you to deflect shield on like the last hit of drone here. It's a little annoying to time.
Let me try it again. Let me see.
Yeah, it's fine. And then there's a setting I can turn on that just makes me always have full security, but whatever.
Oh, I suck. Okay.
It doesn't have to be on exactly the last hit to be fair, but the volume is maximized if you do it on the last hit. So, or the value. Did I say volume? I meant value. Yeah.
There we go.
So that's a projectile, and DS pushback on projectiles is actually a lot higher.
Yeah.
And you can see that I'm way out here. I actually can't threaten anything from this spacing, right? Now, he has ways of calling it out, but if he's approaching in neutral and you really don't want to hold drone and you get forced into a situation where you have to block it, right? As long as he's not literally in your face running up to you, you're going to be able to kind of get out of that situation for free. And a lot of the time he's going to whiff something there and, high recovery and whatnot, especially if it's a behemoth, you can punish him. So that's an example of options being underexplored. So that's kind of all the drawbacks with drone.
Yeah.
Right. And of course it can be wire seed now, and it's not nearly as broken as it once was. But the benefit is still extreme, right? It's still overall a really losing situation for the defender, barring like a couple of characters, basically. It's still something that you have to be very, very careful contesting, because even if I'm Slayer and I have my 2H and I'm contesting with disjoints through it and I'm mixing in my options, for every option you do to try to contest drone, I have an option that if I did, you lose. And you losing is you losing the game right there, because you're getting knocked down by drone, and it's a hard knockdown. And even worst case scenario, if I be as safe as possible with Goldlewis, and I literally approach from like this far back, and I only dash block, I'm getting a ton of screen space for free without taking any risk. And that's like a huge net win for him.
Yep.
And so the reward for drone is really high regardless of what you do on average. That's what makes it such an amazing move. And then there's the other side of the coin, which is what I mentioned earlier, which is that you can kind of form his neutral game plan around it, because it's such an annoying option to deal with, particularly if people aren't practiced at, getting around drone, that I can just commit to a defensive game plan that's a lot harder for you to contest versus me approaching you. And once the drone is charged, you have to really try to stuff the startup. Yeah. Which then again requires you running into him, or else he's going to get a ton of value out of it. So overall, it's an amazing move. And it also has other uses, right? So, for example, like in the corner, everyone knows this situation is really annoying. This is true strike throw pretty much, because your fuzzy jump will get caught by the drone. He can meet you with 2P. It's obviously a very risky spot to reversal as well, because there's a drone on top of you. He can be very safe there. And just on offense in general, this is something that's kind of underexplored with him. Like this sort of thing, actually, yeah, just block. Like this sort of thing that I was mentioning earlier. He has all kinds of super messed up stuff that he can use drone on for extending turns and whatnot. It's actually a disgusting move offensively on top of neutral, which is something that gets left out of the conversation when evaluating how good this move is. So I think overall it's really broken, but the main downsides of it are that, it's not as free as some people seem to understand. And also the strategy of getting it out and playing around getting it out safely, it doesn't work against some characters that are happy to not interact with you, like like Happy Chaos, or characters that can stuff the startup on reaction reliably, like Geo.
Okay. And I guess kind of going back to that, like you said, it has more options than people think, and a lot of people also don't lab against Goldlewis. So the answers that maybe their character have that aren't explored enough because they just don't. They're too lazy and they don't figure it out. So let me ask you, what are one or some things that people misunderstand about Goldlewis as a character? Like what he does or certain aspect of his game plan? What do you think?
That's a great question. And again, I don't want to come across as downplaying here. I really don't. Remember, I rated his I rated his overall offense. Like all things considered, his offense is between a 9 and 10, right? All things considered. But the biggest thing people misunderstand about this character is that he puts you in situations that you can't mess with at all. And that is just not true. The situations he puts you in are situations that pretty much always have some point of interaction. They're just very, very weighted in his favor. Yeah. It's not the same thing at all as not being an interactable situation. And people can weaken his offense a lot by understanding where they can interact. And even if it is risky, it's a billion times harder for Goldlewis to run offense against someone that sometimes represents options and is wrong and dies versus someone who never represents options and just lets you do things for free. I can't tell you, if you could block for a second, the amount of games that I win, even against top level players, literally just looping this shit, that don't know how to interact with this at all. I actually, you would not believe the amount of good players that just fold to that alone. It's unreal. And that's just one example. And I'll even throw a tidbit in for the viewers, something that they really need to understand. Lab the crouch block here. lab this situation. Lab 2K268, lab / space / like lab your interact buttons on that.
Yeah.
And your ability to mess with his offense, again, character dependent, like Zato can't do shit, but some characters can.
Yeah.
Your ability to understand what this character's counterplay is will go through the roof. And I personally have helped multiple players go from like not knowing the matchup well at all to feeling like they actually understand what's going on with this offense.
Yeah.
So for example, like you could talk to Yata or Zondo. Those are two players that I've transformed from like having no idea what's going on against Goldlewis to being some of the better players against Goldlewis overall.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing I'd say people misunderstand about him is that he wins if he touches you. Like if you block him once, the game is over. It's just not true. It's really just not true.
Gotcha. And that kind of answered my other question as well, because I was going to ask, what are some things that you do, like when you play tower, when you fight other people, that you just get away with, and every time it happens, you're just like, oh my god, like, you know, like dude, like come on, like, you know, how can you talk about my character but you can't even like get past this, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
great question. Oh,
that's
man,
do you have anything
to play with on that one?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, right, Goldlewis punishes you so hard for having a lack of knowledge against him on his offense, harder than any other character in the game, because on top of like murdering you, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't know his frame data, if you don't know each of his BTs, if you don't know how to block them, if you can't react to this, you will just automatically lose to him. He filters people really effectively for not having matchup knowledge. And that is something that I think shines when I play tower a lot. Like I literally win. I have like a 96%, 97% win rate on my like tower profile. Yeah. Right? And probably of those wins, 99% of them are from me doing the most basic layer 1 Goldlewis shit.
Yep.
Which is really, really strong, but it's just me like, hold FD for a sec. It's just me doing this kind of thing, like over and over. You know, I'm like just mashing 268 and people have no idea what to do and they just lose. Or they get counter hit and they don't know gaps in certain spaces and they die because being like a long-time Goldlewis player, I have his optimals. I'm going to kill you, you know, if I get one hit.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that, you know, there is a lot that he can do on top of that is very layered. But sort of the biggest mistake that people make against Goldlewis is that they actually just don't know anything at all about him. Like they don't even know the most basic. That is very true. Like they don't know the most basic spots that they can interact with. They don't know the most basic frame data. They don't know the most basic counterplay options. They don't know the most basic reaction checks. Like they don't know anything about him. And he's going to destroy you if you don't know anything about him. Like this character is built to completely dumpster someone if they don't have good knowledge on him. And so, you know, that's kind of a major thing. But I would say, like, if you want to be more specific, and I kind of give people advice, you want to learn your interact points against him, and you want to learn each of the BTs and their frame data. Like, you want to learn how to interact with this kind of thing and what options he has to get around it. And kind of the general structure of his offense and what your character's neutral plan against him is, etc.
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to throw on one thing on top of that, which is I am generally regarded as being the best Goldlewis player in the mirror.
That is true. Okay, that is true. I can vouch for that. I have heard this from many Goldlewis players. I've heard this from many Goldlewis. Sid, Sam.
So I've beaten them all in tournament. You know, I have a winning record in tournament against every Goldlewis except Darkrai because we only played once, and that's Darkrai. That's the GOAT.
That was the
GOAT. That set was extremely close and sweaty. Anyway, I'm not gonna make excuses. It was just a good set, really bad. And he was also really good at the mirror at that time. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. But I really have a very strong understanding of this character's offensive structure and kind of like what people can and can't do. And I'm just gonna say this, right? When it comes to learning with him, it's not like you need to be like an encyclopedia expert on everything Goldlewis does.
Yeah.
If you just lab your basic interact points like this, that will make 95% of Goldlewis's crumble. Like they won't know what to do if you start understanding what your character can do on these very common knowledge checks that people get away with. Because Goldlewis players get very complacent because people are so lazy against the character and they just do like, oh, I got hit, I died, character's bullshit, there's nothing I can do. It's just not true. Like it applies to every character, you know. Yeah. People cope about that, and he's no different. He just punishes you a lot harder. And so, like, the amount of value you'll get for just learning what the character does is insane. Like, that's part of how I became the best at the mirror.
Yep.
And I grinded the matchup a ton as well. That's another thing. But, like, I just learned what he did, and suddenly 99% of Goldlewis is just completely fold against him.
Yeah.
So that's something that's really critical.
Nice. And I guess for the last thing I'll ask you, where would you rank Goldlewis in terms of difficulty? Because obviously, I think, again, I've known you for a while, and I believe years ago we've talked about how hard Goldlewis is. And you were like, you know, you told me, like, you know, having to do the Karas, and there's this and that, and there's a couple other things that went into it. But where would you put him on that scale? Would you put him, maybe he's easy to play, easy to learn, easy to win with? Is he, like, hard to win with, like hard to master, but easy to learn? Where do you place him on that scale? I mean, obviously, in the, I guess the Strive scene, the harder characters are considered like Asuka and Happy Chaos, depending on who you ask. And then Zato, maybe like Milia's easy to, maybe like Milia's easy to play but hard to master. Same with Chip. Where would you put him on that scale?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked this. So to answer the question up front, right? He's got a fairly harsh initial learning curve. Once you're past it, you get a ton of value by doing basic Goldlewis things because people don't know the character. But to push him to like top level and have a really, really well-rounded Goldlewis is extremely hard. So I would say kind of hard to learn at a base level for people that are new. Easy, very easy to play, carries people really hard, all the way up to like highish level, and then very, very hard to master if you're playing at like a top level.
Gotcha.
To do everything correctly. So I'll kind of explain my reasoning. So I'll start with the base level. So he has a lot of unique things that are different to other characters. Like, obviously, he doesn't have a double jump. He's kind of slow and awkward. He has these unique buttons and drawbacks that I mentioned earlier. And then the semicircle thing and having this many specials, it's just something that a lot of people can't wrap their heads around if they're a new player. And it's also very difficult depending on your input device. Like, trying to learn this character on hitbox, I promise you, I promise you, if you're not a Goldlewis player and you play on hitbox and you try to learn him, more than likely you'll just give up, like, trying to do his basic inputs, because it's like very, very unintuitive. And doing these kinds of things about jumping, and you mentioned the Karas and whatnot, that's all considered basic Goldlewis stuff, like inputting behemoths and doing Karas and whatnot. But trying to go from absolutely no Goldlewis to doing that can be pretty annoying. Right, especially compared to, like, okay, I pick up May, I just learn how to charge Dolphin, and I do Dolphin, or like I learn Anji, I just learn how to do Fujin and spin. Like, and that applies to like most of the cast. Like 75% of the cast is very basic stuff that you have to learn, and the characters are not very complicated or anything. But with Goldlewis, the basic stuff you have to learn can be very challenging for new players.
Gotcha.
But yeah, as I mentioned, kind of, and I won't harken on this too much because we did just spend a whole section going over this. Once you get to the basic section where you kind of know how to do easy things without doing like advanced mix-ups, like if this kind of thing is sort of your only mix-up and whatnot, like you just PRC and you do like like high-low, even that is going to get you a ton of value against a ton of people because they just don't react to it. Like, they don't know what to look out in that situation, look out for in that situation rather, and those sorts of things. But if you really want to compete with this character solo at a top level, it becomes way more important to have optimals. So, like, I'll show you an example, right? This is one situation that needs to be, worked on by a lot of Goldlewis. Just get hit. Yeah. You don't have to do anything. Learning to confirm these into like FRCs and getting full value out of this so that you build back to meter is very, very important. And it does require labbing that hit confirm. It's not like completely free. It's pretty spacing dependent. There's like another example of it where, like, okay, if I do it too late or I'm not spaced right, I have to react and adjust with 5H and that kind of thing. And sort of learning those optimizations is really important for him. And also learning more advanced offensive sequencing. Because when you get to the top level, you're more likely to run into people that know what's going on with this character, or like a very high level, however you want to define it. So like the basic mix-ups don't work anymore. You have to work on things that are a little harder to execute, like getting this frame 1 TK is really important on him, as low to the ground as possible, for example. That gives that value a lot more mix-up. And just having general awareness and, like, mixing up your offense with this kind of thing. This is called like a running behemoth. He has actually a ton of tech. Goldlewis. That's kind of another thing that's misunderstood about him. One of the most tech-rich characters in the game. So there's a lot of ways to express yourself with him. And that plays into difficulty if you want to get to learning him. at a very, very high level and distinguishing yourself from basic Goldlewis offense, which again, once good players learn the most basic ways of how to interact with it, 95% of Goldlewis offensive patterns fold to that kind of thing if you're not good at varying it and understanding how to run the rest of his offense and that sort of thing. And like I said, people grow complacent because it's so good. Like they don't go out of their way to learn the important and hard things. And then there's some other examples of things that are legitimately executionally really hard with him. So this is one example. This is called like a raw.
Yeah, raw.
In Goldlewis nomenclature. Basically, these behemoths, they start with up inputs. His jump squat is 5 frames. So if you want to do this without any buffer at all, you need to have a really fast input that is pretty difficult to get consistently. And it's really strong because it's just one more mental stack option, like on meaty, if I'm threatening this versus if I'm just threatening 268 or throw, or like he has left rights on meaties, he has fake left rights. Just learning to vary all your options as much as possible is really important with him. And then he also has this other thing that I mentioned earlier, learning to do 2P684 without getting it on with. I actually can't do this, by the way. Fun fact, that is executionally very hard and really, really important to do as well, if you can. And he just generally has a lot of combos that you need to adjust on the fly, like depending on the spacing of where I hit this. 426, for example, like if I'm close, then I want to go into 268. If I'm further, I want to go into 426 and that kind of thing. And also just optimizing his combos and understanding combo theory with him. This is something that is very important to push Goldlewis to a higher level, in my opinion. So I guess relatively hard to learn, easy to carry yourself disproportionately up to a high level, hard to play optimized at a top level, doing everything from advanced tech to buffer tricks to optimal combos to having good matchup knowledge with him, because he does have some things that are very exploitable if you don't have good knowledge in certain matchups, like knowing how to play Bridget Yo-Yo situation, for example, or understanding Johnny RPS, that kind of thing. All of that factors into how hard a character is to play, versus Leo, for example, can just have like a simple baseline strategy that works against every character. If you're playing at like a really high level, that doesn't really apply as much to Goldlewis. So those are all the things that make him hard. But if I had to rank him, I would say that some characters have a little more manage. If you want to play him optimally, he's up there with the hardest of them, right?
Gotcha.
But do you have to play him optimally? I mean, there's very good evidence that you don't. Like if you look at Rang, for example, Rang is undeniably the best Goldlewis right now, Brazilian Goldlewis by a good margin, and he is actually really quite suboptimal when it comes to like offensive patterns and whatnot, but he's just so much more well-rounded when it comes to matchup knowledge and the way he plays neutral that it works out, and he's just an amazing player. So whereas if you look at Oscar or Zato, right, if you're trying to play at top level and you don't understand every little micro layer of micro interactions and you run into a top player that knows the matchup, which is a lot more likely with those characters too, you're gonna get cooked. Like if you don't have your full Pierce on block flow chart down playing old Zato. I mean, now it doesn't matter the character's ass, but back in the day, back in the day, you would need to know every little situation with him. You would need to. It's a requirement. Whereas with Goldlewis, it's not as much. So that's kind of how I would assess his difficulty. Very long-winded answer, but hopefully it makes sense.
For sure, yeah. And again, Lolo in the past has done a video about Goldlewis counterplay, so I'll put that probably in the comments or in the description if anyone wants to go check it out. I know
Actually, could I interject on that real quick?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Precho is a really strong Goldlewis out of EU right now, and they actually did an updated counterplay guide recently that goes into a lot of detail. So mine is kind of old. The points still apply, but it's from season 2, whereas Precho just did a new one, so you might want to check that out too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Then I'll leave that one in the comments. But yeah, no, I believe that is everything. I will put Lolo's, again, I'll put his YouTube on the screen, his Discord, in case you guys want to go reach out and talk to him, maybe answer some Goldlewis questions, or just maybe about the game. Whether it's fighting Goldlewis or playing him or anything around that, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer. And then I'll put his Twitch on the screen as well. He doesn't stream anymore, from what I know, but he only used to, so maybe he'll do it, sooner than later. So I'll also put that on the screen. But yeah, that should be all. Thank you, Lolo, for coming on, and I appreciate you for watching.